Welcome to the Your Pennsylvania Ancestors podcast. This is Denise Allen of PA Ancestors. This episode is first airing on June 5th, 2020. In the last 7 days in the United States, we have been going through another emotional week together as a country. We have been bombarded with news and images we never thought we'd see, and right now there seems to be no end in sight. The theme of this season is Take a Second Look, and in our first 3 episodes this season, I invite you to take a second look at the emotionally challenging experiences of your ancestors. I believe that when we research our ancestors, we have the opportunity to go farther than just names, dates, and places. What's possible when we stand in someone else's shoes and look at the world through someone else's eyes? We are going to start each episode with an ancestor story from a fellow family historian, and how knowing that ancestor's life has helped her during the uncertain times we are living through now. Then I'm going to end each episode with something you can do to go deeper into your ancestors' lives, beyond just the names and the dates. For this episode, let's start with stories from Heather Wylie's ancestors during 3 different time periods and 3 different infectious diseases that they lived through. Heather Wylie, thank you for coming on the podcast. I put out a call for genealogists to share stories about their ancestors and how those stories of their ancestors are kind of shoring them up through these really uncertain times that we have right now. So I'd love for you to first introduce yourself, give me your genealogy introduction, so people can connect with who you are and what you're about.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity always to talk about my family, because I think that's what we as genealogists love, is the stories. I first became interested in genealogy when my grandmother was sick and I realized I didn't know who she was as a person. So I made a point to get to know my grandparents and their stories. And that's really how an unexpected discovery started, when I was collecting their stories and working to collect information with them so that I could get that out to other people in our family. My great-grandmother, her family moved to Colorado, and they were living there in the early 1900s. So when she was about 10 years old, she brought home scarlet fever to the family. And the family was quarantined, and everyone got sick. And the youngest brother, who was 3, ended up dying from scarlet fever. His little body just couldn't handle it. So the family was quarantined the entire time. They had to mourn the loss of their toddler and sibling in quarantine. And then they were still in quarantine for some time after that. And I found writings that the siblings put together talking about the loss of this younger brother, but they would also all get together at family reunions and talk about him and being in quarantine for the rest of their lives. So that, especially now when we're all kind of in quarantine, is hitting home especially hard, thinking about this family losing their child, living in Colorado in the early 1900s. They had basically a mud house that they were living in early on, and then a farmhouse later. And, you know, it really puts in perspective me being uncomfortable when my Wi-Fi is buffering too long.
You had another story to share too. I would love if you shared that.
So my courtesy aunt, I'm named for her. My middle name is Elizabeth and her first name is Elizabeth, ended up catching polio when she was younger. So the town that I live in was actually the epicenter for the polio pandemic in the 1940s. And then it spread out into Texas. But it was really brought home to me growing up with this member of my family who had been in an iron lung and who had to reteach herself to walk, the importance of vaccines and the importance of, you know, being considerate of other people during epidemics. So that made a lasting impression when I was growing up. And I realized this morning that with my own children, they won't ever really know anyone who had polio. And that was kind of astounding to me to think about that. You know, my aunt had polio when I was in college. My landlord had polio. And it was, I mean, really astounding, thinking that my children won't know these people and that my grandchildren won't know anyone that had polio either.
And you had a third story about the flu pandemic.
My second great-grandfather was a man named Richard King, and he was born in Alabama. The family lived briefly for a time in Arkansas, and then they went back to Alabama. And he decided that what he really wanted to do was be a doctor. And his brother-in-law was a doctor, so he was going to train with him. And he was following him around, observing and helping out. While the flu started coming through. And in 1918, he was still making the rounds with his brother-in-law, and they were going into people's houses. They were treating these flu victims, really, is what they were. And he ended up catching it. And he died from influenza and then pneumonia related to the influenza. And he left behind a young wife and 4 really young kids. The youngest was 4. And they published his obituary. They talked about the death being linked to influenza, the suffering of the family. But it really made me think about how important it was to him, helping his community and being there to support people who were sick, especially now when we're seeing so much about nurses and doctors and everything that they're doing without proper protective wear, that he put his life on the line just like they were, and he ended up dying like so many of them have. And I think that if any of them had a message, his would be about the importance of continuing to help care and support your community. You know, he died caring for the sick. And I think that that's a really powerful reminder for me to be a little bit more gracious, to be as supportive as I can of my community. And that during hard times like this, the most important thing that we can do is just be caring, to be that helping hand.
So where can people reach out to you if they want to connect?
So I am primarily on 3 main platforms. So I'm on Twitter. My handle is an unexpected discovery. I have a website, an unexpecteddiscovery.weebly.com. And then I'm also on Instagram, and my handle is @HWylie07.
Thank you so much again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
This week, the suggested resources to go deeper into your ancestors' lives is one you're going to create yourself. Have you ever wished you had a journal or letters of your ancestors to read? I know I wish that all the time, and I find myself reading journals and letters of people alive at the same time and place of my ancestors just to get a better understanding of their life then. Just to get you started on what I'm talking about, I'm going to bring back Heather to share her advice on keeping a journal and why she does it.
So if I had a lesson that I've learned from finding my family interacting with these pandemics or these hard times, it's really just to make sure that I am recording and documenting my own story. So journaling is something that you talk about a lot. And it's also something that's very important to me because I've realized in going through and working on my family history and in interviewing people and in trying to collect their stories, it's always a little different when you're talking to someone and they're trying to remember the event versus you writing in real time things that are happening now. So I think that that is the most important takeaway, other than doing everything that you can to try to make sure that your community can stay safe, is to make sure you're recording your story right now.
That is fantastic. You knew I was going to ask you about that or connected to you about the journaling, because you are one of the few people I know that's been so faithful about it and so outspoken. And I totally agree with you. I mean, I think it's valuable for us individually just to as our own like mental health and check on, you know, a way to record what we're worried about, you know, and everything. And you know, what our predictions are and what our hopes are, kind of what our, you know, but there's also that piece of what are our daily activities? What is our life like? What are we all going through that, you know, people would find valuable? I mean, I think people can keep a journal that nobody sees, and they can keep a journal, you know, that they want to share, you know, but just write. And I don't, people get caught up to it, like, do I put it in a Word document? Do I, do I print it out? Do I do it on by hands? And I just write, you know, I don't care. You'll figure out the logistics later.
I had a really hard time when I first started journaling because I didn't want it to turn into a Dear Diary situation. I had a really hard time with that. And when I started thinking about it was a way for me to record the memories that I had of my grandparents, then it made it a little bit easier, and it changed over time as things tend to do. And it moved into, occasionally I have a memory that I think of that I share, but more than anything, I'm documenting current events and things that are important to me now, or things that I'm processing. And some of it is embarrassing, and some of it is horrible, and some of it is very touching. But I know that someday my descendants are going to read these journals, and what they're going to take away is that I was a person too. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that's so, oh my goodness. I just want to jump up and down, and I can't because I have to sit by a microphone. But yeah, that's it. Like, we want to know the real people our ancestors were, and you're giving people access to that 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, or whatever, to see, like, Heather was a real person. She lived in, this is what she was like in 2020, or, I mean, what a wonderful gift, and even people not related to you who come across your journal will still be enriched.
So I might be a little biased. My background, I have a history background, and there was an emphasis on personal storytelling and personal story.
Oh, so wonderful.
Always something that's been very important to me. So in recording my own story, in trying to make my ancestors' stories come alive, that's always been a focus.
Thank you again so much, Heather, for being on the podcast. This crisis we are living through is the perfect time for you as a family historian to create a journal or to write letters. Our goal in doing this is to leave something for a future generation to find about our time and our experiences. If you would like to join other family historians, I am launching 14 days of journaling. It'll be a place where you can write together as a community and just keep yourself focused on keeping that journal. We aren't going to share our thoughts and feelings about the current events. There's enough of that going on right now. We're going to work on capturing them down in a way that can be shared maybe for yourself next year, maybe in 5 years with children or grandchildren, maybe with your local historical society. You really can choose what to do with your journal after you create it, but the first step is you have to create it. By the end of the 2 weeks, you will have saved this time in history. So if you want to join in on that, go to my website, paancestors.com. I'll have on the homepage a link where you can sign up, you can get the writing prompts, and you can find out how you can join in. Let's use our talents as family historians to do something good during this time. By the end, you're going to have the kind of record that you wish you could read for your ancestors. Thank you so much for listening. If you wish to contact me, you can find me at my website, paancestors.com. This is Denise Allen, and I wish the best for your family, friends, and neighbors. Thank you.